Thank you.
Enjoy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Stavros Karamperidis. I'm the head of the Maritime Transport Research Group and one of the co-leads of the Sustainable Earth Institute in theme of transport. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today on a very, very fruitful discussion that we had so far during the day, where we're discussing about several net zero solutions and how they can affect our daily lives. Today, the session that we're going to start is going to talk about transportation and mobility. And of course, we're going to discuss about the big elephant in the room that is called emissions and how we can try to decarbonize the maritime transport sector, aviation, roads, and rail. And of course, other modes of transport that people are using in terms to move that are becoming more frequent in our daily lives. We're having the opportunity to have some very well-known speakers today, which we're going to introduce later on. But before I do that, I would like to introduce you to Nick Bowyer, who is going to be the co-panelist with me today. And myself and Nick, we're going to lead the overall discussion today. Nick, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. Hi, everyone. So I'm Nick Bowyer. I'm a Transport Associate Director at WSP, which is a UK consultancy. But I'm also a member of the Net Zero Exchange here, headquartered here at the University of Plymouth, and a mobility lead on the Devon Climate Task Force. So as Stavros has said, we've had an excellent day so far. We're going to have two fantastic presenters for you who are going to run through about 20 minutes worth of presentation each. That's Ben Lee from Beryl Bikes and Andrew Seedhouse from the University of Plymouth, and we'll give you the opportunity to talk to them soon. We're just going to run through a couple of slides first where we just talk through why we're giving the floor over to mobility and transport as a theme for the next hour, and really shining the light on the importance of decarbonising in this sector of the UK's economy. So we'll just bring some slides up, and we'll get going on those. So really, this is an opportunity for us just to see where we are in transport and why is it so that transport is so important to us. Back through my slides. So transport has remained stubborn. The nation's carbon emissions from transport have barely changed over the past 3 decades. We've had a significant flatlining of emissions coming out from transport. And that's really driven by a number of different things that are happening. Whilst we have had fuel efficiencies, we have had changes in the vehicle fleet makeup. Those have been offset by some real changes in terms of purchasing behaviour. So we're seeing much larger vehicles on the road, SUVs is a good example of that. But also in terms of how people are travelling. People are travelling further and burning more fuel. And there's a great graph here that we've got that just shows the scale of the challenge that we have. And this has come from the Department for Transport in the UK. And really, this is what the graph is showing is historically from 1990, our outturn carbon equivalents. So you can see there was a huge part of uncertainty when we hit COVID, which is denoted by that grey bar in the middle. But essentially, the real challenge that we have is that our existing transport commitments that are committed to nationally, which is shown by the blue line, get us nowhere near where we need to be in order to have a net zero transport system. And this is just looking at surface transport. This is excluding international aviation and our maritime and shipping industries. So if we start to include those, the UK doesn't even reach net zero by 2050, even on the most ambitious targets that we have for transport. So that requires offsets elsewhere. So it's a real challenge for us. And that's why we're devoting this session today to a mobility and transport focus session. Just to put this in context of the rest of the country and our nations, our carbon emissions are falling. We're 50% towards our net zero targets, but that's largely been driven by other sectors. and principally three particular areas where we've seen the electricity supply divestment from coal has really given us huge gains in terms of our approach to decarbonising that sector. We've got cleaner industries with shifts away from carbon-intensive manufacturing, and smaller and cleaner fossil fuel industries, which have really contributed to what you can see there on the drop in historical emissions. But putting that against a baseline of transport not really having changed in the past 30 years, transport has now become the single largest sector contributing to UK carbon emissions. So that's more than 25% of all emissions as a result of the transport sector. So it's a real challenge for us, and one where we don't have much time in order to start really bringing that down to meet the targets that we have. So how do we get to net zero is a real challenge. And it's not helped by our national policies. We've got a confused national picture. So a large amount of the plans that the government has rely on decarbonisation of our fleet. So that's more electric vehicles, more ultra-low emissions vehicles. And there have been commitments towards that. But as we've seen in the past few years, the dates for internal combustion engines to be stopped being sold in the UK has been rolled back to 2035 from 2030. That's locking in fossil fuels in our transport system for much longer. As I mentioned earlier, the increase in SUVs and purchasing behaviours is widely recognised as already having cancelled out efficiency savings. And despite being a huge challenge, it's barely mentioned in national policy. Now that aside, and despite the fact that there's this huge reliance on the change in the vehicle fleet in order to get the transport system towards net zero, vehicle journeys will need to drop by around 2 to 4% each year. That's each year for the next decade if we're in order to have a chance to achieving net zero. And that's as a result of the ongoing prevalence of fossil fuel vehicles that will still be in the fleet despite bans on internal combustion engines coming in. And of course, with that, the bans on internal combustion engine sales for freight, for instance, the conversion of our rail network to full electricity, net zero aviation and shipping are at much later dates in government's overall programmes. That means that private car vehicle journeys will need to overcompensate significantly in order to hit that 2 to 4% reduction in vehicles per year. Just to put that into a scale of the challenge, that's seeing the sorts of drops that we saw during the first COVID lockdown each year for the next decade. So it's an absolutely huge change that's required. And one that's at odds with the official projections from the Department for Transport, where all of its scenarios of road traffic use forecast increasing traffic. Adding to that confused national picture is the funding piece. So £2 billion worth of funding has been allocated to active travel. That's set out in gear change and other government documents. £3 billion to buses, both of which have seen various cuts and rollbacks on promises in the past few years. But that's up against a £27 billion commitment for the current roads investment strategy. So again, a very confused picture of how we get to net zero. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I think what we want to explore is how people power can really make a difference in helping. And I just have a couple of slides I want to show you before we introduce Ben and Andrew. This image is on the left here. This infographic has come out of a really recent piece of research that was published in Local Transport Today only this week. This is a survey of both businesses and residents in Lea Bridge Road, which is in Waltham Forest in London. And it shows the difference in terms of what people want to what businesses think will improve access for customers. And it shows the sorts of discrepancies that exist in our planning system and who is advocating for what. So on the right, we've got what visitors to the area, who are those who are patronising shops, would want. And you can see that that's actually around better facilities for crossings, protected cycle lanes, better pedestrian signage to help those active travel modes move so that people can walk and wheel and cycle more efficiently, combined with less traffic. When we look at businesses who are maybe more influential in terms of some of the policy that's coming forward, you see that's really quite a stark picture of more car parking and better located parking. So advocacy can be a really powerful tool. if people can really engage with processes and help to challenge those perceptions, it can empower decision makers to deliver some of the infrastructure that the public would want. Another recent example in the UK is of a low traffic neighbourhood scheme that's been delivered in Bath and North East Somerset recently. There's been a lot of noise in the press about how livable neighbourhoods, or LTNs, are divisive, and certainly there has been recent publications from the government in terms of the plan for drivers that has said that these should be carefully considered and potentially rolled back in some areas. But what we're seeing from residents in areas where they're being delivered, and not in all cases, but what we are seeing is that where they have bedded in and they've bedded in well, there's some really positive outcomes that we're seeing in terms of co-benefits. So people being able not just to have quieter streets, but that enabling them to walk and wheel more, have more community engagement. And they're all things that are really important for health and well-being, which we don't really value in the transport system much at the moment, and which really should form part of a more cohesive approach to how we value transport schemes. So at that point, that's just to set a bit of context. I'm going to stop and hand back to Stavros, who will be able to introduce you to our two speakers.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the kind introduction. And I would like now to pass the floor to Ben Lee, who is a strategic partnership lead at Beryl, helping partners to develop sustainable active travel practice with their fleet of bikes and scooters. So, Ben, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Stavros, and thanks, Nick, for that introduction. What I'm going to do is just share my screen. I'm hoping you can all see that screen okay. So yeah, like Sam said, my name's Ben. I'm the strategic partnerships lead here at Beryl. So I work with different partners across all our schemes to engage with the public and with the companies in order to embed Beryl and the scheme into the local foundation. So I'm going to talk to you about how Pedal Power and Beryl can help support the shift to sustainable transport. To give a bit of context with those people that may not know who we are. So we are Beryl. We are a multi-mobility operator that operates bike share schemes for local government authorities across the UK. We launched in Plymouth in March last year, and we are in around about 15 different locations now across the country. In Plymouth, we have a solely e-bike scheme, which is available for public hire. So to use these bikes, you just download the app, you tap it on, and you take them away. But we also have pedal bikes, e-scooters, and e-cargo bikes. And we are actually the only operator in the UK and Europe, I believe, that has all four of those market-based vehicles within our ecosystem, which is a big plus for us, and is the reason why a lot of local government authorities like to work with us. Now, although you primarily see the bikes out on the streets, that's not the only thing we do. We also develop and run the IoT systems in the back end. So we own it, we produce it, and we develop it. So we really do have that full stack development between those on the road and the software. To give it a context of our success over the past few years, we are nearly at 7 million journeys now on all our vehicles across the UK. So we've been live since the summer of 2019. So we are entering into our 5th year now. And of those almost 7 million journeys, we've gone over 20 million kilometers, which is a fantastic achievement. Now, our main sort of like North Star metric, as it were, is to embed positive travel behaviours and to enable that modal shift away from ICE vehicles, which Nick was talking about. And I'm proud to say that nearly a quarter of all these journeys have replaced a road transport vehicle. So yeah, that's quite a lot of journeys. So as well as sort of embedding people away from private car usage, this is a way that we can help local authorities and councils to lower their CO2 emissions. And we have been able to calculate that Beryl has helped save over 687 tonnes of CO2 equivalent from the local atmosphere, which is the equivalent of just over 4,500 plane journeys from London to Edinburgh. So as I mentioned, one of our sort of North Star metrics is to enable that modal shift away from private car usage and how we can impact travel behaviours. each year we do a rider report where we essentially get a pulse check of all our users to see how they're using us, how we can improve our service, and this enables us to report back and to always build upon our services. Now, following a recent survey, we had some really good findings, a few of which I've just pulled out here to highlight for you all, because I think it's quite pertinent. So the real good news is that more and more people are swapping out 4 wheels for 2. So just over half of people who have used just over half a trip, on Beryl have replaced a car journey, which increases 10% from the year prior, which is excellent. And also what we're finding is that Beryl is helping to boost cycle engagement. Now in Plymouth, this is also quite a simple correlation here between having a e-bike scheme on the street that people can use at their leisure whenever they want to do it, is a way to get people back into the mindset of seeing 2 wheels as a viable mode of transport. And that then enables them to get the bike out of the garage or buy a bike themselves, a pedal bike, a non-e-bike, to use a little bit more. So we do see a direct correlation between schemes where there's an e-bike on street, which sort of captures people and lowers those barriers to access for people to them to then use an e-bike and then realize, oh, you know what, I can actually cycle again. It is like riding a bike, so we can just pick this up and go. And then because of that, we are boosting cycle engagement throughout all our locations. And the top reasons for signing up have shifted over the past few years. At the start, it usually comes out where leisure is the main reason why people like to use our vehicles. However, now almost half people are using it for convenience. I think that's a big thing. And again, ties back into the fact that in places like Plymouth, we have e-bikes only. So therefore they find this a convenient thing. You know, in summertime, they don't want to get all hot and sweaty, so they use an e-bike. If they want to get to work, they don't want to get hot and sweaty, so they use an e-bike. It's a very sort of convenient service that's always out on the street and available, and all you need to have is the app to tap on the bike to unlock it. Another aspect of convenience is bay density. And what I mean by bay density is that the places where you pick up the bikes, we're making sure and we're working with council and travel planners to make sure that there are different bays in places where it would be most used. So again, that feeds into convenience. The fact that over 30 people say it's quicker as well. Again, this feeds into the fact that there's e-bikes around. So it is quicker than cars in some cases getting to and from work, which is a key reason why staff like to use our bikes. Just to dial down a little more into Plymouth specifically, like I mentioned, we launched here in March 2023. We have just over 500 e-bikes dotted around, and there are 100 bays to pick up one of these vehicles. The modal shift rates here are slightly higher than national average, which is great. And I think, again, this does kind of tie into the fact that it's mostly e-bikes and more people are likely to use it. And we found in fact 26% of all our journeys have replaced a car, van, taxi, or motorbike journey. This again does build into reducing people's carbon emissions within Plymouth. We've been able to calculate that we've got just over 8.7 tons of CO2 equivalent saved from Plymouth. And the total journeys currently, we are just under 135,000 journeys and just under 330,000 kilometers ridden in Plymouth itself. So again, a real good scheme, something we're really proud of, and it's only been going for just over a year now, so we do expect this to grow and grow. And I think summer's going to be a key time for us as well, because it's the first summer where it's really integrated. You know, the number of bikes are built up, and we're now at full capacity. So in terms of what organisations can do to help embed this sustainable transport in Plymouth, we do have packages which we can offer out to different organisations. And when I say organisations, I do mean things like companies, networks, universities, colleges, and we work with people across Plymouth and across all different schemes to enable their staff to use these vehicles to enable that shift to sustainable transport and to enable people to have that modal shift away from private car usage. Now, we work together by providing subsidised minute bundles to companies. So a company can provide bundles which can be redeemed via a code. So staff redeem the code and they get free access to Beryl. We work with companies in that sense. We can also whitelist staff. So we can enable someone who has a company which has their own email address. We can say, okay, if you log into the app using your @nike.com email address, for lack of a better example, they would then get free access to Beryl during Plymouth, running around Plymouth. We also have a cycle to work scheme as well, whereby it works in same way that you have a cycle scheme to purchase a bike, it works in the same way in that we are able to provide access to our e-bikes on a monthly sacrifice via our partners. And this comes out to around about, depending on tax, on what sort of tax rate you're on, but it can come down to around about £10 a week to have access for our e-bikes every day, all year round. So we are doing all we can to sort of make this as efficient and as easy to access for staff. Now, the reason why companies like to do this, a lot of companies nowadays have green travel plans, and a big part of that is to impact staff travel behaviours by shifting them away from private cars and onto e-bikes. So we are able to sort of deliver on that one. And also, what they like to see is that reporting we're able to provide for organisations to show them just what impact having access to Beryl for staff members actually does. And on the next slide, I've got a case study of what this looks like. So we do get into a lot more detail when we talk to companies who have one of our packages and provide access to staff. But this is a good little snapshot of their sort of data that we are able to provide as part of any sort of green travel plan monitoring or evaluation that needs to occur. So to give you a local example, we work with University Hospitals Plymouth. And Beryl, we have helped to enable 1,200 journeys at hospital via one of our packages. And the real sort of positive thing about this is that 173 Kaya journeys have been replaced because of this package that the hospital has with us. What's also really positive to see is that 10% of these journeys have been over 10 kilometers. Now, bearing in mind that the average journey on Beryl, and generally speaking in bikes in general, is around 2 to 3 kilometers, this is 3, sometimes 4 kilometers higher than the local average, which is really good because this essentially shows that when you provide access to Beryl and to e-bikes, people will use it and they will start using it for longer journeys as well. And this sort of then embeds into the shorter journeys, such as the commutes. This also goes to show just how sort of comfortable and easy these bikes are to use too. And all this has helped save hospital just over 214 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, which is the equivalent of 93 litres of petrol. And we do like to provide metrics to what these carbon emissions saved looks like, because, you know, generally speaking, nobody knows what 240 kilograms of CO2 looks like. But if you tell someone, oh, that's 93 litres of petrol, that's when you can sort of show people just what impact this initiative is having. Another way that we're helping to support sustainable transport within Plymouth is via a social prescription program. Now we run this in partnership with Plymouth Council, whereby if a user is prescribed activity, so, and in this case, maybe going to ride a bike or getting more fit and getting outside the house a little bit more, we do work with the council to provide access to Beryl. Now, we do this through the council and their partners, the Wolsey Trust and also the Argyle Community Trust. And this is a great way for GPs and council staff in general to sort of prescribe people to keep active and socialise friends and family and to enjoy being outdoors. Now, each user is able to get 400 minutes free for Beryl, and this has resulted in just over 1,000 journeys as well, which is excellent for this sort of program. And just to finish things off fine as well, a real good thing that we're able to provide organisations and local authorities is a heat map of where all the journeys are coming to and from. Now, I think this is great in a number of different ways. Firstly, it looks cool. Everyone loves a heat map, but also it really does help with travel planning. And when you are trying to work out where safe bike routes are, and if a safe bike route which has been newly installed and put together, if that's being used, how popular it is. So you can see here from this image of Plymouth, where people are coming to and from, where the hotspots are. And this can then be fed back into the council network and fed back into the travel planners' hands, so they can then work out where they should be focusing their attention on. And I believe that is it. So thanks for listening. I believe we'll be taking questions later. And for now, I'll hand back to Stavros and Nick.
Thank you very much, Ben, for the really informative presentation. And as you rightly said, everybody likes heat maps at the end. So that was a great final slide. I would say not that the rest wasn't useful, but with that, I would like to move on to Andrew Seedhouse. I would like to welcome him. He is the Director of Transport here at the School of Geography, Earths and Environment at the University of Plymouth. Andrew and myself, we worked in several projects in the past, and I have to say he's an amazing person to work with. But he also has done an amazing work about smart ticketing and how that has been implemented in Great Britain. And if I'm not mistaken, Andrew is going to talk about that at the moment. So Andrew, thank you very much, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thanks very much, Stavros. Much appreciated. Okay, let me share mine. Okay, thank you. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is to talk through a practical example of some work which I'm privileged to be involved in Scotland as chair of the National Smart Ticketing Advisory Board. And it's looking at how we can achieve long-term change in travel behaviour through supporting free travel for young people. Now, I'm sure everybody on the call this afternoon is more than familiar with Scotland and its operating environment, but giving you a little bit of background context, it's a relatively small population size given the area of the country, just over 5.4 million people, with 93 inhabited islands and over 220 transport operators made up of bus operators, rail, ferry, tram, and subway. And a single slide really on the background of the organisation that I introduced, NSTAB. So NSTAB is National Smart Ticketing Advisory Board, and it's made up by individuals from each of the core transport sectors within Scotland, as well as specialists in key delivery areas, transport strategy, consultancy, delivery, etc. It was created as a result of the Transport Act in 2019, and in summary, the role of NSTAB is to provide strategic advice to the Scottish ministers in relation to smart ticketing and strategy, technological development, engagement and consultations. Now, I can't claim that the introduction of the free young persons travel in Scotland is a direct result of NSTAB. It has started before NSTAB. We only had our first formal meeting late last year, but the role of NSTAB is to assist and help future developments, growth and change of similar type of initiatives. So as a little bit of a background to what Scotland has been doing over the last decade or so in support of net zero and reducing climate change, one of the big activities which has been going now for over a decade is the introduction of a national entitlement card available for any Scottish resident over 60 or any Scottish resident who has a disability. Now, the entitlement card provides free travel on registered and long distance buses in Scotland at any time of day, 7 days a week, and also where it's needed will provide support for a companion pass for eligible disabled users. And in addition, because of course the rural nature of Scotland and many of the islands, indeed it does extend wider for island residents on areas such as support on local ferry travel and the like. So it's very similar to what I'm sure you're familiar with in either England and Wales, to the national ENCTS, the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme, except in England, the concessions for elderly people start at 67 and are only available after 9:30, whereas in Scotland, eligibility starts at 60 and is the 24/7 eligibility. Now, I'm sure you'll be familiar that Scotland hosted in Glasgow COP26 in 2021. And as part of COP26, all of the delegates were provided with a smart travel pass, giving them multi-operator and multimodal travel within Scotland as part of their delegate pack. And indeed, that generated over 141,000 public transport journeys during the COP26 weekend. And genuinely, as we were involved in the development and the operation of the cards for COP26, there was a free post address on the back of the delegate's card, so that they could all be recycled after the use of COP26. And genuinely, this morning, one of my colleagues in Scotland let me know that actually we even received one of those passes using the free post this morning. So 3 years after the event, we are still receiving cards back from delegates. Scotland also has a network of schemes where local operators work in partnership with bus companies to deliver area-specific initiatives to promote sustainable transport via smart travel. And there's an example there of a map and some of the schemes that operate through partnership working across the country. And indeed, when we talk about smart travel, although people might be thinking smart cards, actually it's much wider than that. When we define smart travel, we include barcodes and QR codes on M-tickets embedded within phones, and we also include contactless travel on buses as well. So where you tap in with your EMV card and tap out with retrospective capping and the like. So it covers quite a wide area. And the example here, quite a nationally innovative app was created for mobility as a service with the Highland Islands Regional Transport Scheme. So there's a good mix already in place within Scotland upon which a base has been built. And if anybody does want additional information on what is going on in smart travel in Scotland, please use the link here, which will be available in the delegate pack afterwards. Okay, so moving on to the actual Young Scot scheme itself. This was an initiative launched and created as an idea back in 2020, with the government announcing plans for free bus travel for young people and children up to the age originally of 19. And that was later expanded in 2021 to cover everybody aged between 5 and 21 years, so anyone under 22. And it was developed in partnership with the Young Scot organisation, which pre-existed. And Young Scot is there as a support body, creating identity cards for young people and also providing discounts and support services. So there was a natural association to develop the new entitlement in partnership with the Young Scot organisation. And very much in line with what Nick was saying earlier, this was all about helping and develop long-term changes to sustainable travel behaviours, but also fundamentally and very much in the news this week in relation to the general election coverage associated with tackling poverty and indeed young person and children's poverty. So by providing the free bus travel, looking to support long-term change in relation to travel behaviour, open up opportunities for social, education, employment and leisure, and to reduce cost, therefore contribute to reduction in poverty levels. So as we outlined, the pass is available for everybody in Scotland aged between 5 and up to 22. Free travel not only on local buses, but all of the long distance bus coach services within Scotland, of which there's a very good network, any time of day, any number of journeys, 7 days a week. And in addition, for those between 16 and 18, they also get discounted train and ferry travel as well. And of course, the pass in partnership with Young Scot is used as an identifier for accessing retail discounts, rewards, proof of age, that sort of thing. So the scheme went live at the end of January 2022. So it took just over a year from announcement to operation, and within Scotland there were up to 930,000 eligible residents, and just over in the first year, so in the first 14 months, 59% of all residents in Scotland aged between 5 and 21 had signed up and got themselves one of the entitlement cards. And you can see a split here that there was a low level of take-up, lower level between young people 5 to 15, and a much higher level of take-up for those 16 to 21. And I don't think anyone would be at all surprised of that type of age profiling. And then breaking it down in the authority areas in Scotland, again, your big urban areas like Edinburgh, Dundee were very high in original take-up, and then lower level down towards the Falkirk end there. And then when you look in the profiling of the age of young people in those areas, again, it seemed a not unusual profile that was achieved in the first year. They were looking to achieve both short, medium, and long-term outcomes. Very short outcomes are getting people to use it, raising awareness of the scheme, but actually trying to record and support fewer young people learning to drive. This is all about establishing new forms of long-term travel behaviour on the support for progression to net zero. Increasing awareness of bus travel as a viable option, and in particular as a viable option for young women. This was very much one of the key aims of the scheme. And then, as we talked about in terms of cost of living, reduction in travel costs for young people, giving them access to new opportunities that they may not have been able to achieve and access through cost and financial barriers without the free bus travel. In the medium term, that supports, as we've outlined, increased access to services, and also trying to observe and monitor the level of journeys that would have been made by a car that are transferred over to buses in a very similar way that Ben had outlined for Beryl buses, Beryl bikes as well. And in the longer term, this is the key objective for the scheme: reduction in poverty for young people because of a greater level of improved access to education and employment opportunities, improve access for social and leisure opportunities as well, and to reduce the private car kilometres of this age group as they develop and go further into adulthood. So in terms of success and usage, now it's been live for just over a year and a half, no, actually slightly longer now, 2 years. And by December 2023, there were over 100 million journeys had been used using the Young Scot entitlement card for people under 22. So not a bad start. And the Scottish Government commissioned some detailed evaluation work on the first year, looking at a detailed survey of almost 11,000 participants. Parents and carers and young people themselves made up the majority of those completing the survey, but also they undertook focus groups as well with 42 people, including people who had the opportunity to take up the scheme but had chosen not to do so, to try and get that mix in terms of responses and understanding the lessons learned. Now, these are very early days, so this was taken a year after the scheme was launched, but as a snapshot, awareness was good, with that high level of take-up. Too early to say at this stage whether it was influencing on young people learning to drive. Certainly an increase in awareness of buses as viable travel, and indeed the figures stated that was the same, particularly for young women as well, and good progress in contributing to the cost of living crisis by providing the travel at no cost. So a good start in terms of the short term. Moving into the medium term outcomes on the progression that they were making, of course, increased numbers. You know, we had over 100 million journeys, so that was a good breakdown, and I'll show you in a minute the split between new journeys and journeys that would have been made by bus anyway, and indeed how young people were using it to access new opportunities for themselves. In the long term, obviously, we're not really able to monitor long term yet, so we're not able to put quantifiable values in relation to reduction in poverty, but it's on a good trajectory from the early feedback, as is improved access to the education, employment, and social leisure. Likewise, over the long term, we can't give detailed numbers yet, reduction in private car kilometres, but we can show the percentage of journeys that have moved away from private car to buses based upon the feedback that we had from the users. So this is a simple growth profile over, well, up to April last year, since the scheme was launched, showing ongoing growth, averaging now upwards of around 5.5 million journeys each month. And a breakdown here of usage. Would you have used the bus if it had not been free? Comparing access to those core facilities. So going to university, 65% were saying they had used the bus because it was free. 34% would have used the bus anyway. So it's showing high levels of new generated bus journeys across all of the core areas here, in particular shopping, social, leisure, visiting family and friends and the like, which was a very encouraging sign. When looking and asking the users whether it helped them with independence, looking at the different age groups, from 12 to 21, very much they were saying, yes, it is really helping with their independence. We're not surprised that it's much lower at 5 to 11. You wouldn't be expecting that many of 5 to 11-year-olds to be off out on independent travel on buses. So it's certainly hitting the right demographics that we were all hoping for. So looking at moving in the right direction, impacts before and after the scheme came in. Here, this is showing both positive and negative consequences of the scheme. So, you know, do you agree that they are more environmentally friendly before and after? A positive response. Affordability, clearly a more positive impact there. But actually being realistic, there are two in here which actually have come out on a more negative basis. So buses are too busy and crowded. That's increased perception-wise up to 47%, mainly because, of course, it's been quite successful. And then slightly disappointingly, lots of antisocial behaviour on buses has also increased from 39 to 45%. So that is an adverse consequence associated with the free travel provision. And then at the bottom of that table there, very much related to timing, when it was launched, a significant reduction in the concern associated with viruses in a post-COVID environment and bus travel. Again, on a before and after comparison, are people moving from different modes over to the bus? And for a lot of the core metrics, there are very positive lessons being learned here. So going to school and college by car has dropped from 19% to 16%, and buses is increased from 30 to 34% over the period. Again, positive for apprenticeship work, but so far no change in relation to those using private car to go to work. So that's an area that obviously can be looked at. And then good reductions on social, leisure, shopping, etc. So in reducing car mileage, in getting people out of cars and onto buses, it is influencing the change to contribute towards the net zero and the carbon reduction targets. And when you multiply this up via the 110 million journeys, it's making quite a positive impact. So to conclude, really, impact has been good, and it's proving very popular with a high level of usage. It is beginning to support the longer term change. We have noticed some adverse impacts to date around antisocial behaviour, and looking at what can be done to address that over time. And we do continue to monitor quite often to make sure that we can see changes as they are happening. And then lastly, having outlined what's going on in Scotland and the impact it's having, just to show you the rest of the national picture on mainland UK, Wales has a free pass, also entitling young people to 30% reduction on all buses in Wales. And nationally, we have nothing in England. We only have localized discounts for young people agreed between bus companies and the young people themselves, or bus companies in partnership with local authorities. And if there's an area the new administration could be looking at as a genuine contribution to net zero, this is a sort of scheme we should be looking at in England as well. So, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Andrew. That's a really interesting presentation there, and fascinating actually to see sort of how the co-benefits that we're talking about around some of those public transport improvements can, help with the just transition and making a fairer transition for everyone in our society. That'll be really interesting to see how the evaluation going forward, what those surveys look like in terms of 3 years post, 5 years post, and how the behaviour change has been locked in. Okay, I think we've got about 10-15 minutes for questions now in terms of thank you very much for putting them into the chat for us. We'll run through as many of them as we can get through before our 2:15 cutoff, and I'll bring Andrew and Ben in as needed. I guess, Andrew, just following up first though on your presentation, there's been a couple of questions in the chat that we've had around public transport affordability, and that really being one of the key ways that we can, minimize private vehicle use. So a couple of questions in there around, well, how can we encourage greater subsidies for trains and buses, but also, ensuring that public transport is at the heart of our decarbonisation efforts. So I don't know if there's anything, I think your conclusions, as you've seen from your 1 year post survey, seem to be suggesting that it is having a real impact in terms of locking in some of that behaviour change. But where do you expect there to be other opportunities available for public transport going forward?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm sure most people will be aware that since the end of COVID in England, the government introduced a scheme with the bus operators and the local authorities to cap a single journey on existing buses in England to £2. And that has been in place for a few years now, and it continues to be extended. Some say cynically it kept extending until the general election was announced. So at the moment, that £2 cap on single journeys is in place till the end of the year. The government, in terms of carbon reduction, have also made funding available for increase in the number of electric buses. But actually, overall, when you look at route mileage of buses throughout the country over the last 20 to 30 years, they are on a continual decline, particularly in our rural areas. And, we can go back to looking at the planning system. We can go back to looking at what we are doing to actively support modal change and what could be done for making that happen a little bit more. It's been very disappointing the last couple of years, as Nick, you outlined about the amount of money allocated for road building, the 27 billion pounds or so. What we have not seen is any demand management measures to restrict or reduce the use of car travel, where the income raised from that would be available to support public transport. We really do need significant investment in our public transport, walking, cycling, active travel network to deliver the change that's needed for contributing down towards net zero.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And I think, yeah, just to echo that point in terms of demand management, there's very few examples across the UK at all. I mean, I think we've had the example of the workplace parking levy, for instance, in Nottingham, which has a great job at ring fencing those funds for sustainable transport, but it's not really been replicated elsewhere. So,
and every time it's proposed, we look at the kickback it gets with local politicians, the media, and indeed we all saw the impact of the mayoral election, the extension of the ULEZ approach. It is very much at the moment not a vote winner.
Agreed. Thank you very much for that, Andrew. It's really helpful. I think next, if I can, I'd just like to bring Ben into the conversation. So Ben, there's been a couple of questions around your micromobility work that you've been running in Plymouth. So I think just two to touch on in the first place, if we can do. One is around the active travel subscribing pilot that you've been helping the Plymouth Authority work on. And in terms of really, can you give some more information on that and the benefits that it's having? Now, I know obviously it's a pilot that there's, I think, 12 around England that are happening. I know that there's one in Bath and North East Somerset, for instance. And I think from what I've seen, the evidence has been showing that, you know, being active has some significant health and well-being outcomes that come from that. But are you able to tell us a bit more about what's happening in Plymouth in your trials?
Yeah, so I can't talk too much about the impacts and monitoring because that is all done by the council and by their affiliated medical services. And so we're currently running it in Plymouth and Cornwall, and the results from the actual usage and of the way that's getting people onto bikes from our side is going really well. And what we're currently seeing is that the users of this scheme via safe subscription are actually taking 18 journeys on average per user, which is double what the national sort of average is for a user. So what we are finding is when people receive these codes to access Beryl, they are indeed using them. Interestingly enough, what's coming back to us straight away, rather than having to wait 6, 12, and 18 months of the reporting, is that when you provide someone with 200 minutes, they don't use it anywhere near as much as if you provide them with 400 minutes. So potentially there's a psychological aspect there where if you give someone longer minutes, they think themselves, oh, they're more likely to use it. And again, I'm not the one doing the research into psychology and the research into the actual medical impact of social subscription, but from our side, it is going well. And in Plymouth, we're working with directly with the council via their community partners. In Cornwall, we're working more directly with the council with their Healthy Cornwall team, and we are looking to expand this out into other areas where social subscription is available, and to give local authorities their due, where social subscription isn't sort of embedded and where social subscription hasn't received funding from central government, we are working with a number of councils at the moment to put something in place via other funding sources within the council as well. So I think they are seeing the benefits from this already, and other councils are trying to sort of replicate it themselves. You're on mute.
Thanks, Ben. Just to touch on one of the other questions that's come in, there's a question, I guess, around the effectiveness of micromobility schemes and can they really help us to decarbonize the transport system. So I guess my initial take on that is that it's around providing users with choice and helping to give them that choice as to what modes they use. But again, it might be worth, I don't know if there's any stats from your presentation, it's worth just going back over.
Yeah, no, I think you said it right there, Nick. It's all about giving people the choice and having more options. If the car is the only option they have, they're going to take the car. If that person lives in a round place with a bus stop, with a train station, or with micromobility service, that provides options. So they don't necessarily need to use their own private car. And I think that's where it all comes down to what can we do to provide people with a viable alternative. And I think that viability is a big thing. And that's where the bay density comes into it, which I mentioned in the presentation. Where we work with councils like Plymouth, where they're really forward thinking and they are open to having lots of different bays, so therefore lots of different places for people to start and end their journeys in, we are clearly seeing a bigger impact there on both membership results and engagement in general, because it's more convenient. And again, that draws back to what I was talking about beforehand, where people are saying 48% of people who use a service are using it because of convenience. So it is all about the options, and it's all about providing people with the viable alternative to using your car. And it does work in hand in hand. It is very much a collaboration. We are currently seeing a massive increase in journeys being used by people who are picking up bikes and putting them back at train stations. So again, that ties into how when you're talking about transport planning and what we can do to work with councils to embed marketability and to embed low carbon transport, it is things such as making sure there's bays outside the station. Do people take the train, get on the bike, and then go into work, and then get the bike back to the station, and then take the train back home? It is all about how we can connect rural areas where there are no marketability networks with those people who are coming into the city or town where there is a marketability option. So they therefore then get a train into the city, and when in a city or town using a bike. All of these sort of low carbon, low impact alternatives.
Great, thank you, Ben. Andrew, I'd just like to bring you back into the conversation, if I may. So I think these next couple of questions sort of line up on the theme of what you've been talking around. So there's a couple of questions which I think more align around the planning system as a whole. So one is around how do people drive to work simply because there's a lack of jobs where they can afford to live, so they can't afford to live near where there's jobs, and is the planning system partly responsible for that? And then a second run around, again, which I think is quite planning related, and it might be useful to see if there's any evidence from the work that you've been doing in Scotland, which is around rural areas being notoriously poor for public transport provision. And I think you've already mentioned about cuts to bus kilometres in rural areas. So how can we better link up villages and settlements in those deep rural areas with green transport routes? I just wondered if you have a take on that at all.
Yeah, certainly. So on the first one, in terms of affordability and travel, yes, absolutely. You know, we've been based in Cornwall for the last 30 years, and you've seen the impact on house prices and second homes and holiday lets, meaning my kids can't afford to live in the village that they grew up in. You know, they now live in cities because it's the only place realistically that can access jobs and pay for housing. So it is forcing people to travel more. And an economy like Cornwall, where there's a lot of leisure-based work in the hospitality sector, you're finishing 11:30 at night, there are no buses home. You know, I don't think it's surprising that Cornwall has, I believe, the highest average age of a car than any other county, because people need it to access jobs and to get back. On the point in relation to rural transport and the planning system in general, yes, absolutely. We've seen a huge amount of sort of rural depopulation of local jobs. People move into the countryside and then choose to commute in. So absolutely right there. Other countries do it differently. Other countries will identify that all rural villages over particular populations are guaranteed clock-faced bus services from early in the morning to late at night to interchange hubs, meaning you grow up with the knowledge that you can access goods, services using public transport. We don't do that here. It is illegal for a local authority to subsidise a bus service where there is one that might be provided by the commercial sector, and it is a non-statutory duty in order to provide support for buses in rural areas. They are really not funded to be able to do it as well as they wish to do so.
Great, thank you, Andrew. That's a really comprehensive answer. I think with that, and apologies, I know there's some other questions in the chat. We have hit 2:15, so I don't want to hold people up from being able to access the other presentations that are just about to kick off. What I would say though is that please do keep these conversations going on the discussion boards on the SpotMe platform. There's absolutely fantastic wealth of information hopefully on there, but also an opportunity for you to connect with others and to talk about things in much more detail. But just to finally wrap up, I'd like to again say a really big thank you to Dr. Andrew Seedhouse and to Ben Lee for some really engaging, very different presentations, but really showing opportunities that exist there to decarbonise our transport network. And I'd like to just bring Stavros back in for a final thank you.
I would like to thank everybody, Nick, Ben, and Andrew, for the really amazing discussion. It was very well thought, and I think we managed to generate a lot of valuable thinking during the last 1 hour. With that, I would like to conclude, and I would like to thank you all for attending the session. I've seen a lot of discussion going through the live session into the SpotMe, and I'm looking forward to seeing you the next session. Thank you very much.